I adopted a billionaire, then a hidden pendant, exposed everything. I've been lying to you, Olivia. His voice cracked as he held the gleaming pendant between us, the ruby at its center catching the firelight. My world stopped spinning. My name isn't Edward. It's Maxwell Bennett. I'm not just some amnesiac you rescued from the beach. I'm worth billions. I stared at the man I'd taken into my home 6 months ago, the man who'd become my children's hero, my confidant, my almost something more. The pendant's silver compass design seemed to mock me now. You remember everything? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. Every fortune, every property, every empty night, in mansions too big for one person. His gray eyes held mine, desperate for understanding. But Olivia, nothing in my old life ever felt like this, like home. I stepped back, arms wrapped protectively around myself. Were you pretending all this time? No, he reached for me, but I moved further away. The amnesia was real. But the pendant, when Zoe found that article online, when I saw my face, something unlocked. I've known who I was for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of lies. 3 weeks of watching our children grow more attached while he knew he'd eventually leave us behind for billion-dollar boardrooms. Get out, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Get out of our home. Olivia, please. You don't belong here, Mr. Bennett. You never did. 6 months earlier, I'd never imagined my life would intersect with a billionaire's, let alone that I'd be the one to rescue him. That stormy March evening changed everything. I was walking our stretch of Maine coastline, checking for damage after the nor'easter that had battered us for 2 days straight. Lighthouse Haven, the foster home I'd built from an inheritance and sheer determination, sat perched on the cliffs above, its windows glowing warmly against the gray twilight. We'd weathered the storm intact, a miracle given our perpetual financial struggles. Rain drizzled steadily as I picked my way across the rocky beach, noting places where the water had eroded our already precarious shoreline, another expense we couldn't afford. That's when I saw him, a figure slumped against the jagged boulders at the base of our small lighthouse. At first, I thought the storm had claimed a victim, but as I approached, the man stirred, raising a hand to shield his eyes from my flashlight. "Hello?" I called, the wind nearly stealing my voice. "Are you hurt?" He looked at me with utter confusion, rainwater streaming down his face. His clothes, what remained of them, were clearly expensive. Tailored trousers, the tatters of what must have been a fine dress shirt, a single leather loafer still clinging to one foot. Around his neck, an ornate silver pendant with a ruby center gleamed incongruously against his disheveled state. He shook his head, disoriented. I don't know. I crouched beside him, medical training kicking in as I assessed for injuries. Don't know if you're hurt, or don't know how you got here? His gray eyes, striking even in their confusion, met mine. I don't know who I am. I should have called the police immediately. Instead, I helped him up the winding path to Lighthouse Haven. Something in his lost expression reminded me of every child who'd ever arrived at my door, abandoned, forgotten, in need of sanctuary. I'm Olivia Kane, I told him as we staggered through rain-slicked darkness. You're going to be okay. I run a place for people who need somewhere to go. The chaos that greeted us inside the sprawling Victorian was typical evening fare at Lighthouse Haven. 17-year-old Zoe was arguing with 13-year-old Marco about homework while trying to cook dinner. 10-year-old twins Jamie and Danny chased each other through the hallway, nearly colliding with us as we stepped through the door. Whoa! Marco skidded to a halt, eyes widening at the bedraggled stranger leaning against my shoulder. Everyone, I announced. This is... I faltered, looking at the man. I don't know, he repeated, embarrassment coloring his voice. Zoe stepped forward, pragmatic as always in a crisis. With her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and steady hands that never seemed to shake, she'd become my right hand over the 3 years she'd lived with us. I'll get towels, she said, already moving. Marco, call Dr. Rivera. Within minutes, our unexpected guest was seated at the kitchen table wrapped in towels, a mug of hot tea steaming before him. The children watched with undisguised curiosity as I checked his vital signs. Pulse is strong, I noted. Any pain anywhere? He shook his head slowly. Just emptiness. like I've been hollowed out. Dr. Isabella Rivera arrived 20 minutes later, her ancient Subaru crunching on our gravel driveway. As the only doctor in our small coastal town of Harper's Cove, she was used to unusual calls from Lighthouse Haven. Amnesia, she confirmed after a thorough examination in our makeshift infirmary, originally a sunroom, now equipped with basic medical supplies. No physical trauma I can detect, but without proper scans, it's hard to determine the cause. Could be psychological. Could be a mild concussion that's not presenting obvious symptoms. Should we take him to Portland? I asked, referring to the nearest hospital with appropriate facilities. She glanced at her watch. The roads are still flooded from the storm. I'd say he's stable enough to wait until morning. After she left, I prepared our small staff bedroom for him. Grateful we had no residential counselor currently on payroll, another casualty of our tight budget. You can stay here tonight, I told him, setting down a stack of clean clothes donated from a local church. In the morning, we'll figure this out. He stood awkwardly in the center of the simple room, fingering the pendant that still hung around his neck. I should have something, he murmured. ID, wallet, phone. Nothing in your pockets, I confirmed, just that pendant. He lifted it, studying the silver compass design with its ruby center. This feels important, but I don't know why. Maybe it'll help trigger memories, I suggested. Try to rest. I'm just down the hall if you need anything. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Thank you, Olivia, for taking in a stranger. It's what we do here, I replied simply. Morning brought sunshine, 4 curious children, and no miraculous recovery of memory for our guest, Dr. Rivera returned to drive him to Portland Hospital, where CT scans and more thorough examinations confirmed her initial diagnosis: amnesia of unknown origin, no obvious physical cause. We've contacted the state police, the ER doctor told me when I arrived to check on him. No matching missing persons reports so far. Without ID, we're limited in what we can do. He had this. I produced the pendant, which I'd brought along hoping it might provide clues. It looks valuable, maybe custom made. The doctor examined it. Interesting craftsmanship. We can check if it's been reported stolen or lost. In the meantime, he glanced at the man sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, staring out the window. We can't keep him here. Our psychiatric unit is at capacity, and he's physically healthy. What happens to him? I asked, already sensing the answer. The doctor sighed. We'd normally refer to social services, but with the state's current backlog. I'd seen it before, adults who fell through the cracks of our overtaxed system. My work focused on children, but the same bureaucratic holes swallowed people of all ages. He can stay at Lighthouse, I heard myself saying. Temporarily. We have the space. The man looked up, surprised. You'd do that for a complete stranger? I shrugged, uncomfortable with his intensity. You're not the first person who needed a place to stay while figuring things out. On the drive back to Harper's Cove, he stared at the coastal landscape as if searching for recognition in every curve of shoreline. We should call you something, I said, breaking the silence. Until you remember. He touched the pendant absently. You choose. I considered him tall, distinguished despite hospital scrubs and borrowed sneakers, with silver-streaked dark hair and those remarkable storm-gray eyes. Edward, I decided. It suits you. Edward, he repeated, testing the sound. As good as anything, I suppose. We'll find out who you really are, I promised. Someone must be looking for you. He turned to me, vulnerability, naked on his face. And if they're not? I had no answer for that. The children accepted Edward with the resilience of young people accustomed to the transient nature of our household. Lighthouse Haven had housed dozens of temporary residents over the years, children waiting for permanent placements, families in crisis, the occasionally stranded traveler. He talks fancy, Marco observed after dinner that first night, like those British shows Miss Olivia watches. He has nice manners, Danny added. He pulled out my chair and called me young lady. He's probably rich, Zoe concluded. Or was, before whatever happened to him. I shooed them to their evening chores, but privately agreed with Zoe's assessment. Edward carried himself with the unconscious confidence of privilege. His hands were manicured, uncalused hands that had never known hard labor. He pronounced certain words with the subtle inflection of expensive education. Yet for all these hints of a privileged past, He showed no entitlement. That first week, he insisted on earning his keep, tackling maintenance jobs around our aging property with surprising competence. "I may not remember who I am," he told me, "but apparently I know how to fix plumbing." I found him underneath the kitchen sink, efficiently replacing a leaking valve that had been on my someday repair list for months. "We usually call a handyman for that," I said, impressed. He emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Seems I'm full of surprises, even to myself." Over dinner that night, a chaotic affair with the children all talking over each other, Edward watched our interactions with fascination. "Have you always done this work?" he asked as we cleaned up afterward. The children dispatched to homework and showers. "Lighthouse Haven? It's been 11 years now. I scrubbed a particularly stubborn pot. Started small, just me and 2 foster children in a rented cottage. Built it up gradually. It's extraordinary," he said quietly, "the way you've created a family for children who need one." Something in his tone made me look up. "Does that resonate with you?" He frowned, concentrating. "I'm not sure. There's something familiar about the feeling here. The chaos, the laughter, but it's like trying to hold smoke." "Don't force it," I advised. "Dr. Rivera says memories often return naturally when you're relaxed and not trying too hard." "Is that your professional opinion, Miss Kane?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Hardly professional. I have a nursing degree I rarely use, and a lot of on-the-job training in teenage drama management." "You're underselling yourself." He took the pot I'd been scrubbing, rinsing it thoroughly. "I've seen how you are with them. You have a gift." Heat crept into my cheeks at his praise. "They make it easy. They're good kids. Because they have you." I changed the subject, uncomfortable with his focus. "The police will check the pendant with jewelers tomorrow. Maybe it'll lead somewhere." He nodded, but seemed unconcerned by his unresolved identity. "I should look for work while I'm here. I can't impose indefinitely." "Let's give it another week," I suggested. "Your memory could return any day." But I found myself hoping, selfishly, that it might take a little longer. There was something comforting about Edward's presence, his quiet competence, his thoughtfulness, the way the children had already begun looking to him for help with homework or to referee their squabbles. For years, I'd managed Lighthouse Haven alone, with only part-time staff and the occasional volunteer. Having another adult in the house, one who noticed when I was overwhelmed and stepped in without being asked, felt like finding a puzzle piece I hadn't realized was missing. 2 weeks stretched into a month. Edward's memory remained stubbornly elusive, but his presence at Lighthouse Haven became increasingly natural. The police investigation stalled, with no matches in missing persons databases. The pendant, while valuable, wasn't registered with any jeweler in their networks. Spring arrived in full force, bringing with it the annual challenge of keeping Lighthouse Haven financially afloat. I sat at my desk one evening, staring at spreadsheets and bank statements, trying to find money that didn't exist. "Bad news?" Edward asked from the doorway, carrying 2 mugs of tea. I sighed, accepting one gratefully. "Same old story. Summer maintenance costs, program fees for the kids, property taxes coming due. We'll manage. We always do." He settled into the chair across from me. "May I?" He gestured to my laptop. I hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. Financial troubles were private. Embarrassing, but Edward had become part of our household, and he'd already seen the patches in the roof, the ancient furnace that barely survived winter, the second-hand clothes the children wore. He studied the spreadsheets with surprising focus, asking occasional questions about income sources, regular expenses, seasonal fluctuations. I explained our cobbled-together funding state reimbursements for foster care, always delayed, modest private donations, grants when we were lucky enough to secure them. "You're operating on margins so thin they're practically transparent," he observed. "Welcome to the nonprofit world," I replied wryly. "We're officially a private foster home with auxiliary community services, which puts us in a weird funding category. Have you considered alternative revenue streams? Something to complement the core mission while providing financial stability?" "Like what? Opening a gift shop?" "Lighthouse Haven t-shirts." He smiled, undeterred by my sarcasm. "You have waterfront property in a tourism-heavy region. That's untapped potential. For the next hour, He outlined possibilities converting our underused boathouse into a vacation rental, offering sailing lessons, using our small fleet of donated dinghies, creating a summer camp program that would bring in tuition while providing enrichment for our residents. I stared at him, speechless. That's actually brilliant. How did you come up with all this? A shadow crossed his face. I don't know. It just seems obvious. Edward, I said carefully, I think you might have a background in business or finance. He glanced down at his borrowed clothes, jeans, and a faded flannel shirt from our donation closet. Seems a far cry from this. You've adapted remarkably well for someone who likely came from privilege, I observed. Most people would be complaining about the accommodations, not fixing the plumbing, and redesigning our business model. Perhaps I wasn't very happy in my previous life, he suggested quietly. Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. The possibility that his amnesia, mysterious as it was, might be serving some deeper purpose, a fresh start, unburdened by whatever his past contained. Well, I said, breaking the moment, I'm grateful for your business acumen, wherever it came from. These ideas could really help Lighthouse. Happy to be useful. He stood, taking our empty mugs, though I draw the line at t-shirts with my face on them. I laughed, the tension dissipating. Darn, there goes my best marketing strategy. Edward's business instincts proved transformative. With his guidance, we converted the boathouse into a charming rental unit, ready just in time for the summer tourist season. He negotiated with contractors, stretched our limited budget with uncanny skill, and even did much of the finish work himself. Have you remembered being a carpenter too? I teased as he installed crown molding with professional precision. Apparently my hands remember things, my mind doesn't, he replied, though I suspect I supervised more than I built. The vacation rental was an immediate success, booked solid through August. Edward's next project was a system to offer sailing lessons to summer visitors, engaging our older foster children as assistants, providing them valuable work experience while bringing in additional revenue. By early June, Lighthouse Haven's finances had stabilized for the first time in years. The constant knot of anxiety I'd carried between my shoulder blades began to loosen. I don't know how to thank you, I told Edward one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the ocean in fiery hues. You've given me a home, Olivia. That's worth more than financial strategies. He'd been with us 3 months now, and the police had officially closed their investigation into his identity. Without new leads or evidence of foul play, they classified him as an adult amnesiac who would need to establish a new legal identity if his memory didn't return. Does that bother you? I asked. The possibility that you might never remember? He was quiet for a long moment, absently touching the pendant that still hung around his neck. Less than it should, perhaps. I know I must have had a life before, possibly people who cared about me, responsibilities I've abandoned, but, I prompted when he didn't continue. But I've never felt more at peace than I do here. His gaze, when it met mine, held an intensity that made my heart flutter. Is that terrible of me? No, I whispered. It's human. The moment stretched between us, electric with possibility. Then Danny burst through the screen door, breaking the spell. Miss Olivia, Edward, Marco says I can't be first mate in tomorrow's sailing lesson because I'm too little. But that's not fair because I'm actually better at knots than he is. Edward chuckled, ruffling her curly hair. Let's examine this maritime dispute, shall we? I believe there's a regulation that says twins must alternate as first mate. It's the law of the sea. Danny's face brightened. Really? Would I lie about maritime law? He winked at me over her head. I watched them head inside, Edward listening with exaggerated seriousness to Danny's continued grievances against her brother. The strange lightness in my chest persisted. It had been growing for weeks, this feeling that somehow, against all logic, Edward's mysterious arrival had been exactly what Lighthouse Haven needed. What I needed. It was a dangerous thought, one I tried to dismiss. Edward would eventually remember his past or build a new future either way. Lighthouse Haven was just a temporary haven for him, as it was for so many others who passed through our doors. Yet watching him with the children, the ease with which he'd slipped into our lives, made it increasingly difficult to imagine Lighthouse without him. Summer bloomed in full glory. Our small coastal town swelled with tourists. The vacation rental stayed booked, and sailing lessons brought a steady stream of visitors to our property. The children thrived under the additional attention and structure Edward provided, especially Marco, who had struggled with male role models in the past. "He's different with Edward," Zoe observed one afternoon as we watched them repairing a sail together. "Less angry." "Edward has patience," I replied. "And he never makes Marco feel inadequate." Zoe gave me a sidelong glance, too perceptive for her 17 years. "You like him?" "Of course I like him. He's been an enormous help." "Not what I meant," she interrupted, smirking. "You times him." Heat crept into my cheeks. We're not. It's okay, you know," she continued, mercifully lowering her voice so the twins playing nearby couldn't hear. "To want something for yourself, for once." I stared at her, startled by her insight. "I have everything I need right here." "Miss Olivia," Zoe's dark eyes held mine steadily. "You've given all of us a home when we needed one most. Maybe it's time the universe returned the favor." Before I could formulate a response, she wandered off to help the twins with their seashell collection, leaving me unsettled by how accurately she'd read my carefully hidden feelings. Edward had become essential to Lighthouse Haven in just 4 months, not just for his business acumen or maintenance skills, but for the balance he brought to our home. He remembered the twins' complex fantasy game rules, discussed philosophy with Zoe, played basketball with Marco for hours without complaint. He noticed when I was overwhelmed and steered the children toward quiet activities, or simply handed me a cup of tea and took over dinner preparations. More than once, I'd found myself wondering what it might be like if he stayed permanently, not as a resident in need, but as a partner in this life I'd built. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. That evening, after the children were in bed, I found Edward in his usual spot on the porch swing, staring out at the moonlit ocean. I settled beside him, the swing creaking gently beneath us. "Penny for your thoughts," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not sure they're worth that much." "Try me." He hesitated. Then, "I had a flash today. Not quite a memory, more of a feeling." My heart quickened. "About your past." "I was helping Marco with math, and suddenly I knew with absolute certainty that I've spent countless hours looking at financial projections, investment portfolios. That numbers are a language I speak fluently." "That's progress," I said carefully, noting his troubled expression. "Isn't it?" "It should be." He turned the pendant over in his fingers, a nervous habit he'd developed. But it came with a feeling of emptiness, like I spent my life accumulating wealth without purpose. "You don't know that," I pointed out. "Maybe you donated to charities. Maybe you funded medical research. Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. "But then why does this," he gestured around us, at our modest porch, our aging house, "feel more right than anything else I can almost remember?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't reveal too much of my own heart. "The mind is strange," I said instead. "Dr. Rivera says emotions can return before specific memories. Maybe you're just feeling disconnected from your past self because you can't remember the context. Or maybe I wasn't very happy," he suggested quietly, "and this amnesia has been a gift rather than a curse." Our eyes met, and the air between us seemed to charge with unspoken possibilities. Before I could find words, he reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch sending electricity through me. "Olivia," he said, his voice dropping lower, "I may not know who I was, but I know who I am now, here, with you and the children." My heart hammered against my ribs. "And who is that?" "Someone who's falling in love with this place, with this life." His eyes held mine. "With you." Time suspended as his words hung in the night air between us. I should step back, maintain professional boundaries, remember that his past could reclaim him any day. Instead, I leaned forward as he did the same, our lips meeting in a kiss that felt both unexpected and inevitable. When we broke apart, I rested my forehead against his, breathless with the newness of it. The rightness. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" "I have nothing to offer you, Olivia. Not even a real name." I smiled, touching his cheek. You've offered plenty. More than you know. We stayed on the porch until stars filled the sky, talking quietly about everything, and nothing, careful to avoid the uncertain future. Content to exist in this perfect present where his past remained at bay and possibilities stretched before us like the ocean horizon. 2 more months passed in a sweet haze. Edward and I kept our relationship discreet around the children, though I suspected Zoe at least had guessed. We worked side by side during the day, rebuilding Lighthouse Haven's financial foundation, and spent quiet evenings together after the children were asleep. On weekends, we took all 4 kids on excursions, hiking coastal trails, exploring tide pools, picnicking on secluded beaches. Watching Edward patiently teaching Jamie to skip stones or helping Danny identify seabirds, I allowed myself to imagine a future where this was permanent. You're good with them, I told him one afternoon as we watched the children racing along the shoreline. He smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. They make it easy. They're remarkable kids. Because of you, partly. You've given them so much attention, so much stability. I've only been here 6 months, he reminded me. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. I hesitated, then added, You've changed mine too. His hand found mine, warm and solid. For the better, I hope. Definitely for the better. September brought cooler temperatures and the start of a new school year. Our summer revenue stream slowed, but thanks to Edward's financial strategies, we had reserves to carry us through the leaner months ahead. We should expand the rental property portfolio, he suggested one evening as we reviewed the summer's earnings. 3 more units would provide year-round income stability. With what capital? I laughed. We're doing better, but we're not exactly flush with investment funds. We could approach community lenders. The summer numbers make a compelling case. I studied him across the desk, this man who'd washed up on our shore half dead and now spoke confidently about investment strategies and business expansion. You're really good at this, I observed. In another life, you must have been quite the businessman. A shadow crossed his face, the same look he always got when we referenced his unknown past. Perhaps. Does it bother you still? Not knowing? He considered this. Less and less. Sometimes I feel I should be more concerned about the life I've forgotten. But then his eyes met mine. I think about the life I've found, and it's hard to imagine wanting anything else. My heart swelled. 6 months ago, I'd been drowning in responsibility, stretching every dollar, carrying Lighthouse Haven's burden alone. Now I had a partner who shared not just the work but the vision, someone who saw the potential in what we'd built and wanted to make it stronger. More than that, I had someone who saw me not just the caregiver, the guardian, the perpetual problem solver, but Olivia the woman. Someone who brought me tea when I was tired, who noticed when I needed silence, who kissed me like I was precious. I love you, I said, the words escaping, before I could reconsider them. His eyes widened, then softened. Olivia Kane, he said, voice rough with emotion. Amnesia has taken many things from me, but it gave me the greatest gift in return, finding you. I love you too. He rounded the desk, pulling me into his arms, and for that perfect moment, his missing past seemed utterly irrelevant to our future. The next morning brought Diane Reynolds from Social Services for her monthly inspection. These visits were routine checking on the children's welfare, ensuring Lighthouse Haven maintained proper standards, reviewing our financial records. Diane had been our caseworker for years, a by-the-book bureaucrat who'd gradually warmed to our unconventional approach. Today she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone as she moved through her usual assessment. Everything looks good as usual, Olivia, she said as we concluded in my office. The children are thriving, and your financial situation has improved dramatically since my last visit. We've implemented some new revenue streams, I explained. Edward has been instrumental in helping us establish a more sustainable model. At Edward's name, she glanced at her phone again, then hesitated. About Edward. How much do you know about him? The question caught me off guard. You know the situation, Diane. He arrived with amnesia 6 months ago. The police investigation didn't turn up anything. She bit her lip, uncharacteristically nervous. I saw something this morning. A news article. My stomach tightened. About? May I? She gestured to my computer. I nodded, and she typed quickly, bringing up a news site I didn't recognize. She turned the screen toward me. The headline hit me like a physical blow. Reclusive billionaire Maxwell Bennett still missing after 6 months. Beneath it was a photo that stopped my heart. Edward, my Edward, in an expensive suit, looking slightly younger but unmistakable, standing outside a gleaming skyscraper. "That's him," I whispered. Diane nodded grimly. Maxwell Bennett, CEO of Bennett Investments, disappeared from his yacht during a solo sailing trip in March. Coast Guard search found the vessel intact but abandoned near Portland. He was presumed dead after months without contact. The room seemed to tilt around me as I struggled to reconcile the image on my screen, this powerful, wealthy stranger with the man who had become so integral to our lives. "There must be a mistake," I said weakly. "The resemblance is uncanny, Olivia. And the timing matches perfectly." I stared at the screen, reading fragments of the article. Worth an estimated $4.7 billion. Notoriously private. No family. Empire spans real estate, technology, shipping. "If he is Bennett," Diane said carefully, "this could be problematic from a legal standpoint. He needs proper medical care, and there are likely people with legal authority over his affairs who should be notified." "He's received medical care," I protested. "Dr. Rivera has monitored his condition, and he's been evaluated by specialists in Portland." "For amnesia, yes, but not as Maxwell Bennett, a missing billionaire." Diane's expression softened slightly. "Olivia, I know he's become important to Lighthouse Haven, but if this is true—" "I need to talk to him," I interrupted, rising from my desk on unsteady legs. "Before we do anything else." I found Edward Maxwell in the garden with the twins, helping them harvest the last of the summer vegetables. The domestic scene was so at odds with the image of the powerful CEO I'd just seen that I almost convinced myself Diane was mistaken. "Edward," I called, striving to keep my voice steady. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" He looked up, smiling the warm smile I'd come to treasure. "Of course," he ruffled the twins' hair. "Keep an eye out for more tomatoes, gardeners. I'll be right back." He followed me to my office, where Diane waited with the computer screen still showing his other life. "Olivia, what's—" He stopped abruptly, seeing the image, the headline. All color drained from his face. "Is it you?" I whispered. He stepped closer to the screen, transfixed. His hand went to the pendant around his neck, fingers tracing the engraved B on its back that we'd never been able to identify. "Bennett," he murmured. "Maxwell Bennett." And in that moment, I knew we'd lost him. What followed was a whirlwind I could barely comprehend. Diane contacted authorities, who reached out to Bennett Investments. Within hours, private doctors and corporate attorneys descended on Lighthouse Haven, transforming our peaceful home into a command center for the recovery of Maxwell Bennett. I stood to the side, watching strangers claim the man I'd come to love. The children were devastated, especially Marco, who had attached himself to Edward most strongly. "They can't just take him," he protested, tears streaming down his face. "He belongs with us." I had no answers that would ease their pain or mine, Edward now confirmed as Maxwell seemed caught between worlds, answering the doctor's questions mechanically while his eyes constantly sought mine across the room. That evening, after the corporate contingent had departed to make arrangements at a private medical facility in Boston, Maxwell found me alone on the porch, in the spot where we'd shared so many conversations. Our first kiss. "Olivia," he said quietly, "I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You didn't know who you were." "But I did." The words hung between us, devastating in their simplicity. For the past 3 weeks, I've remembered everything. The admission hit me like a physical blow. 3 weeks, I repeated numbly. "And you said nothing." "I was afraid," he admitted, sinking onto the swing beside me. "Afraid of losing this you, the children, Lighthouse Haven. Afraid of becoming him again. Maxwell Bennett, billionaire," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "A man who had everything and nothing," he corrected softly. "Great wealth, empty houses, no family, few friends. I built an empire, but had no one to share it with." "So you lied to us?" "To me?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I couldn't find the words," he said. "Every day I woke up planning to tell you. And every day I convinced myself to wait just one more day in this life I'd grown to love. While I fell deeper in love with a man who didn't exist, the tears I'd been holding back spilled over." "Was any of it real, Edward? Or should I call you Maxwell now?" Pain flashed across his face. "All of it was real. The man you know, the man I've become here, that's the real me, Olivia. More authentic than the persona I built over decades in boardrooms." "How can I believe that?" I stood, needing distance from him. "You've been lying for weeks." "I was wrong," he acknowledged, remaining seated. "I should have told you immediately, but my feelings for you, for the children, those have never been anything but honest." A corporate car waited in our driveway, ready to take him to Boston. Men in suits stood respectfully at a distance, waiting for their billionaire boss to finish his conversation with the charity worker who'd taken him in. "What happens now?" I asked, arms wrapped protectively around myself. "I don't know," he admitted. "Medically, they want to ensure there's no underlying condition causing the amnesia. Legally, there are companies that need attention, decisions that have been in limbo. So you go back to your real life." "This feels like my real life," he said quietly. "The rest feels like a dream I had once." The corporate sedan honked discreetly. Time was up. "I have to go," he said, rising. "But Olivia, this isn't the end. Please believe that." "Goodbye, Mr. Bennett," I replied, deliberately formal. "I wish you well in your recovery." His face crumpled at my coldness, but he nodded once and turned away. I watched him walk down our porch steps, across the gravel drive that he'd repaired by hand, into a waiting car that probably cost more than Lighthouse Haven's annual operating budget. As the sedan pulled away, I noticed the pendant still hanging around his neck, the only piece of Maxwell Bennett that had washed ashore with him 6 months ago. It caught the setting sunlight, flashing brilliantly as he disappeared down our winding driveway. Only then did I allow myself to truly break. The children took Edward's departure differently. The twins were confused, their young minds struggling to reconcile that their beloved Edward was actually a famous billionaire. Marco retreated into anger, refusing to discuss Edward or acknowledge the gifts that arrived for him. Expensive gaming equipment, sports gear, a telescope better than any we could have afforded. Zoe, practical as always, researched Maxwell Bennett obsessively, compiling articles and video clips, studying the man who had lived among us. "He's not what you'd expect," she told me one evening, showing me an article about Bennett's business philosophy. "He built his fortune ethically, refused to lay off workers during recessions, created scholarship programs for employees' children." "Zoe," I sighed, "you don't need to convince me he's a good person." "But you're miserable," she countered. "And from what I can tell, so is he." She pulled up a recent business news segment showing Maxwell Bennett at a press conference, explaining his mysterious absence. He looked impeccable in a tailored suit, his silver-streaked hair perfectly styled, yet I could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that hadn't been present during his time with us. "He doesn't look happy to be back," Zoe observed. "It's not that simple," I said, closing her laptop gently. "His life is there. Ours is here." But in the quiet evenings after the children were asleep, I found myself on the porch swing, remembering how perfectly he had fit into our imperfect world, how alive Lighthouse Haven had felt with him in it, how for the first time in years I'd allowed myself to imagine a partner in this life I'd built, someone to share both burdens and joys. 2 weeks after his departure, a formal letter arrived on heavy stationery bearing the Bennett Investments logo. Inside was a document so unexpected it took several readings to comprehend. "Dear Ms. Kane, please find enclosed the deed to Lighthouse Haven and surrounding property, transferred to the newly established Lighthouse Haven Foundation, with you as executive director and sole trustee. Additionally, an endowment has been established to ensure the continued operation and expansion of your programs in perpetuity. No acknowledgement or thanks is necessary. Consider this partial repayment for the invaluable gift of sanctuary when I needed it most. Wishing you and the children every happiness. Maxwell Bennett." Accompanying the letter was financial documentation showing an endowment large enough to secure Lighthouse Haven's future indefinitely. With trembling hands, I read through terms that would allow us to expand our programs, hire needed staff, renovate our aging facilities, and never again worry about meeting basic needs. "Is it good news?" Zoe asked, finding me still at the kitchen table an hour later, papers spread before me. I shook my head, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling through me. "Edward Maxwell has ensured Lighthouse Haven's future." Her dark eyes studied me carefully. "But not yours." I looked away, unwilling to admit how accurately she'd identified the hollow feeling beneath my gratitude. The money would solve our practical problems, but it wouldn't fill the Edward-shaped space in our home. In my heart, "It's enough," I said firmly. "More than enough." But that night, alone in the quiet house, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. It wasn't enough at all. The days that followed brought a flurry of activity to Lighthouse Haven. Lawyers, accountants, and contractors arrived to implement the changes made possible by Maxwell's endowment. I moved through these meetings like a sleepwalker, signing papers, approving renovations, interviewing potential staff members, all while feeling strangely detached from the miraculous transformation of our financial circumstances. 1 month after Edward became Maxwell again, Zoe found me alone in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. "You should call him," she said without preamble. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "He's made his choice, Zoe. He's back in his world." "Is he?" She held up her phone, displaying a business magazine article. "Because according to this, Maxwell Bennett has delegated daily operations at his companies to his executive team and hasn't been seen at corporate headquarters in 2 weeks. I kept my eyes on the stubborn dandelion I was battling. That's his business. Miss Olivia." Zoe's voice softened. "You taught us that people make mistakes, that forgiveness matters, that second chances are possible. Why won't you give him one?" "It's complicated," I sighed, sitting back on my heels. "Only because you're making it complicated." She crouched beside me, unexpectedly adult in her insight. "You're afraid." "I'm not, Pliss." "You are," she insisted gently. "You've been taking care of everyone else for so long that you don't know how to let someone take care of you. You're scared to want something for yourself." Her words hit too close to home. "When did you get so wise?" I asked, trying to deflect. "I had a good teacher." She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Just think about it, okay? None of us want to see you unhappy. Especially the twins. They've started praying for Edward to come home every night." After she left, I sat in the garden until sunset, remembering Edward as he'd been here, hands in the soil, teaching the children about plants, laughing as Jamie chased butterflies between the vegetable rows. The memory ached like a physical wound. That night, I finally allowed myself to look at the business card Maxwell had left, with his personal number handwritten on the back. 3 times I picked up my phone, and 3 times I set it down again. What could I possibly say? How could we bridge the chasm between his world and mine? And how could I trust him again after his deception, however well-intentioned? Sleep eluded me. Near midnight, I slipped outside to the porch, swing our spot, and stared at the moonlight dancing across the water. The pendant around Maxwell's neck had caught the light just like that the day he left. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Olivia." His voice, so familiar it made my heart contract. "I'm sorry to call so late." "Maxwell." I tried to keep my tone neutral. "Is everything all right?" "No," he said simply. "Nothing has been right since I left Lighthouse Haven." I closed my eyes, fighting against the wave of emotion his words triggered. "Why are you calling now?" "I saw the construction began today, the expansion we planned together." "You've been watching us?" "Not exactly." He hesitated. "I've been staying in town, at the Harbor Inn." My eyes flew open. "You're in Harper's Cove? For how long?" 3 weeks, he admitted. "I couldn't stay away, but I didn't want to intrude. I just needed to be near, to see the lighthouse from my window, to know you were all okay." "Why didn't you come to see us? The children miss you terribly." His voice roughened with emotion. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. Not after everything." The ache in his voice mirrored my own. 3 weeks he'd been just miles away, watching from a distance, respecting boundaries I'd established in hurt and anger. "The twins pray for you every night," I said softly. "Marco pretends not to care, but he keeps the basketball you gave him by his bed. And Zoe has a file on her computer, labeled Edward Maxwell Evidence, where she's collected every article that proves you're a decent human being." A choked sound came through the phone, something between a laugh and a sob. "And you, Olivia, where do you stand?" The question hung in the silence between us, weighted with all we'd shared and all we'd lost. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm grateful for what you've done for Lighthouse Haven, but I'm still hurt, confused." "I understand," he said quietly. "I broke your trust. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I miss you all desperately. The emptiness I felt before Lighthouse Haven has returned tenfold." "Maxwell, please," he interrupted. "Call me Edward. When you say Maxwell, it feels like you're talking about someone else." "But that's the problem, isn't it?" I couldn't keep the frustration from my voice. "I don't know who you really are." "Neither did I," he replied softly, "until I washed up on your shore. Olivia, the truest version of myself, is the man I was with you and the children. That's who I want to be." I closed my eyes, remembering his hands fixing our leaky plumbing, his patience teaching Jamie to sail, his arms around me as we watched sunset from this very swing. "The children would love to see you," I said finally. "Maybe you could come by tomorrow? For dinner?" The relief in his voice was palpable. "I'd be honored." "What time?" 6 o'clock. I hesitated, then added, "Just be honest with them. About everything. They deserve that." "Absolutely," he promised. "No more secrets. From any of you." After we hung up, I sat watching the ocean for a long time, wondering if I was making a terrible mistake or taking the first step toward healing. I didn't tell the children Edward was coming. Their disappointment would be too acute if he didn't show. Instead, I channeled my nervous energy into cooking his favorite meal, my grandmother's lasagna recipe that he'd once described as better than any 5-star restaurant. At 5:55 p.m., a sleek black car pulled into our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Maxwell Edward emerge, looking both familiar and strange, in tailored slacks and a simple button-down shirt. He carried a large bag and moved with the same purposeful stride I remembered, though tension lined his shoulders. The doorbell rang, and 4 pairs of footsteps thundered toward the entryway before I could intervene. "I'll get it," Marco called, reaching the door first. I hung back, heart hammering, as Marco pulled open the door. Silence. Then, "Edward?" Marco's voice cracked with disbelief. "Hello, Marco." Edward's voice carried clearly through the hall. "It's good to see you." What happened next came as a complete surprise. Marco, who had been the angriest about Edward's departure, the most resistant to discussing him, launched himself forward in a fierce hug that nearly knocked Edward off his feet. "You came back," Marco mumbled against Edward's shirt. Edward's arms encircled the boy, his face a study in surprised joy. "I did. If that's okay." The twins pushed past their brother, dancing with excitement. "Edward! Edward! Did you really sail on a yacht? Do you have a swimming pool? Can we visit your house?" "James! Danny! Give him some space!" I called, finally stepping forward. Edward looked up, his eyes finding mine over the children's heads. Something electric passed between us. Recognition, longing, uncertainty. "Hello, Olivia," he said softly. "Edward," I acknowledged, deciding to honor his preference. "Welcome back." Zoe appeared from upstairs, observing the scene with cautious optimism. "Mr. Bennett," she said formally, testing the waters. "Just Edward, please," he responded, "though I understand if that's difficult now." She studied him with a penetrating gaze that had always seemed beyond her 17 years. "Are you staying this time?" Leave it to Zoe to cut straight to the heart of the matter. Edward didn't flinch from her direct question. "That depends on many things," he said honestly. "But I'd like to, if I'm welcome." "That's not an answer," Zoe pressed. "You're right." Edward nodded, respecting her challenge. The truth is, I've reorganized my companies to run without my daily involvement. I've moved my primary residence to Portland, and I've been staying at the Harbor Inn for 3 weeks, trying to work up the courage to come see all of you again. His candor surprised everyone, including me. This was different from the careful half-truths he'd told before. This was vulnerability, transparency. "So you want to come back?" Marco said, hope threading through his voice. Edward looked at each child in turn, then finally at me. "More than anything, but I understand that trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. I'm prepared to earn my place here again, if you'll give me that chance." Danny tugged at his sleeve. "Does this mean you're not a billionaire anymore?" He smiled gently. "No, I'm still that, unfortunately. Though I'm learning it matters far less than I once thought." "Dinner's ready," I announced, needing a moment to process the emotions swirling through me. "Everyone wash up, please." As the children scattered, Edward approached me cautiously. "Thank you for this," he said quietly. "I know it can't be easy." "They've missed you," I replied, maintaining some emotional distance. "I couldn't keep you from them, once I knew you were so close." "And you?" he asked, those gray eyes searching mine. "Have you missed me too?" Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, Marco called from the bathroom. "Edward, can you help me fix the sink? It's making that weird noise again." Edward's smile was equal parts apologetic and delighted as he turned toward Marco's voice. "Duty calls, the billionaire plumber returns." Despite myself, I laughed. And for the first time since discovering his true identity, something tight in my chest began to loosen. Dinner was surreal, Edward, back at our table, as if he'd never left, yet everything fundamentally changed. The children peppered him with questions about his real life, his companies, his wealth. "Do you have a butler?" Jamie asked, wide-eyed. "I have household staff at my larger residences," Edward admitted, "but I prefer to do things for myself when possible." "Like fixing sinks," Marco nodded approvingly. "And making pancakes," Danny added. "Edward makes the best chocolate chip pancakes." "That skill I definitely developed here," Edward smiled. "Before Lighthouse, I'm not sure I'd ever cooked a proper meal." "What do you remember about before?" Zoe asked. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "About when you were just Maxwell Bennett?" Edward considered this, his expression thoughtful. "It's strange. I remember facts, figures, business deals. I remember properties I own and people who work for me. But emotional memories are fainter, like watching someone else's life through foggy glass." "Is that why you pretended you didn't remember?" Marco asked bluntly. "When you actually did?" The table fell silent. I tensed, wondering how Edward would handle this direct confrontation. "No excuses," Edward said after a moment. "I was wrong to lie to all of you. The truth is, when my memory returned, I panicked. I'd found something here I'd never had before. Connection, purpose, family. The thought of losing that terrified me." "So you lied," Zoe stated, not accusingly, but clarifying. "I did," Edward acknowledged. "I told myself I just needed time to figure things out. But days became weeks. The longer I waited, the harder it became to tell the truth." "Until Miss Reynolds recognized you," I added quietly. Edward nodded, his expression pained. "I'm deeply sorry for the hurt my deception caused, especially to you, Olivia." The air between us, charged with unspoken emotions. The children glanced between us, sensing the complexity adults so often try to hide. Danny broke the tension with her characteristic directness. "Do you still love Miss Olivia, even though you're a billionaire now?" "Two." Edward choked on his water while I felt heat flood my cheeks. "Danielle," I admonished gently, "that's not an appropriate question." "Actually," Edward said, recovering his composure, "it's the most important question of all." His eyes met mine across the table. "And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes." The simple declaration hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Before I could formulate a response, Jamie piped up. "Does that mean Edward's coming back to live with us?" "It's not that simple, sweetheart," I began. "Why not?" Marco challenged, suddenly fierce. You love him. He loves you. We all want him here. What's the problem? The problem, I said carefully, is that adults sometimes need time to work through complicated feelings. Trust, once broken, needs to be rebuilt. Edward nodded. Your mother's right. I hurt her, hurt all of you by not being honest. I need to prove myself trustworthy again. How will you do that? Zoe asked, ever practical. By showing up, Edward replied simply. By being present. By keeping my word. And by giving Olivia all the time and space she needs to decide if she can forgive me. His gaze, when it met mine again, held no pressure or expectation, only patient hope and sincere regret for the pain he'd caused. That seems fair, Zoe concluded, resuming her dinner. But don't take too long deciding, Miss Olivia. None of us is getting any younger. The unexpected adult phrasing from a teenager broke the tension, and laughter rippled around the table. For a moment, it felt like before our makeshift family intact again, the wounds beginning to heal. After dinner, Edward produced the bag he'd brought, presenting each child with a thoughtfully chosen gift, not extravagant displays of wealth, but items that showed his attention to their individual interests. For Marco, a vintage collection of nautical maps. For Zoe, first edition philosophy books she'd mentioned wanting to read. For the twins, handcrafted wooden puzzles designed by an artisan in Maine. And for Lighthouse Haven, he added, presenting me with an envelope. You've already given more than enough, I protested. This isn't money, he assured me. It's something I hope will benefit the children. Inside was documentation for an educational partnership between Lighthouse Haven and several prestigious universities, guaranteeing scholarships for any of our residents who qualified academically. This ensures that any child who passes through these doors will have educational opportunities regardless of financial circumstances, Edward explained, including specialized programs for those who prefer trade schools or alternative paths. I stared at the papers, overwhelmed by their implications. This is extraordinary. It's just opening doors, he said softly. You and these remarkable children do the real work. After the excitement of his gifts, the children reluctantly prepared for bed, extracting promises from Edward that he would return soon. He agreed to help with weekend sailing lessons and offered to assist with the expansion construction, just as he'd planned months earlier. Finally, we were alone on the porch, the night echoing with familiar sounds, waves against the shore, crickets in the garden, the distant lighthouse beacon sweeping across the water. Thank you for tonight, he said, breaking our companionable silence, for letting me see them, for giving me a chance to begin making amends. They needed to see you, I replied, keeping my gaze on the moonlit ocean, to understand why you left, why you stayed away. And you? He asked quietly. What do you need, Olivia? The question caught me off guard in its selflessness. No demands, no expectations, just genuine concern for my needs after everything that had happened. Time, I admitted. Space to think clearly, to determine if what we had was real or just a fantasy created by extraordinary circumstances. It was real, he said with quiet certainty. At least for me. I turned to him then, studying the face that had become so dear to me, the silver-streaked hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the mouth that had kissed me so tenderly on this very porch. I want to believe that, I said honestly. Then let me prove it. His voice held determination without pressure, not with grand gestures or financial gifts, but with consistency, with presence, with honesty. How would that work exactly? I asked, practical concerns surfacing. Your life is in Portland, New York. Probably a dozen other cities where you have interests. Our life is here. Actually, Edward shifted slightly. I've been considering a more permanent arrangement in Harper's Cove. The old Whitaker property is for sale, the Victorian on the bluff north of here. I knew the house, a stunning, historic property that had stood empty for years, its owners unwilling to sell for less than its considerable asking price. That's over a mile away, I observed. Close enough to be present for the children, far enough to give you the space you need. His eyes held mine. I don't expect to pick up where we left off, Olivia. I know I've broken something precious, but I'm committed to rebuilding it, if you'll allow me that chance. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't Maxwell Bennett, billionaire CEO, used to commanding rooms and closing deals. This was Edward, the man who had helped Jamie with nightmares, who had taught Marco to change oil in our ancient van, who had held me on this porch as we watched stars emerge over the Atlantic. "One day at a time," I said finally. "That's all I can promise." His smile was gentle, grateful. That's more than enough. As he prepared to leave, I walked him to his car, a modest sedan rather than the luxury vehicle that had taken him away months earlier. "The children will be thrilled you're staying nearby," I said, maintaining some emotional distance despite the pull I still felt toward him. "And their mother?" he asked softly. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the only path forward. Their mother is cautiously optimistic, but still guarding her heart. He nodded, accepting this. "Understandable. I'll earn that trust back, Olivia. However long it takes." As his taillights disappeared down our winding drive, I wondered if I was making another mistake, letting him back into our lives, risking more heartbreak for all of us. But watching the children's faces tonight, seeing the joy his return had brought them, I couldn't regret opening that door, however slightly. True to his word, Edward became a consistent presence at Lighthouse Haven over the following weeks. He appeared for sailing lessons on Saturday mornings, helped Marco with science projects, attended Zoe's debate tournament, and assisted with the construction of our new wing, often working alongside the contractors in jeans and a t-shirt, looking nothing like the billionaire CEO whose face occasionally appeared in business publications. The Whitaker property sold quickly, and renovation began immediately. Edward consulted the children on various aspects of the design, incorporating spaces for their visits, a game room for Marco, a library nook for Zoe, a craft studio for the twins. He never pressured me to participate in these planning sessions, but left the invitation perpetually open. One afternoon, I found him with the twins in our vegetable garden, designing a fall planting schedule. "We should put the kale here," Danny instructed, pointing authoritatively at her hand-drawn garden map. "It needs partial shade." "Excellent planning," Edward agreed. "And perhaps carrots along this north side? They'll have room to develop properly there." Jamie looked up from where he was measuring spacing between rows. "Edward, will your new house have a garden too?" "I'm planning one," Edward replied, "though I'll need expert consultants to help design it." Jamie beamed at the implied compliment. "We could help, right, Danny?" "Definitely." Danny nodded. "Your soil might be different because you're on the bluff. We should test it." "I was hoping you'd say that." Edward smiled, producing a soil testing kit from his bag. "I brought this just in case." Watching their easy interaction, I was struck by how naturally Edward had reintegrated himself into their lives. Not as Maxwell Bennett, billionaire, but as Edward, the man who remembered their preferences, encouraged their interests, and treated their opinions with genuine respect. Later, as the twins proudly displayed their soil analysis charts, Edward noticed me observing from the porch. "Would you like to see the house?" he asked quietly, approaching while the children were distracted with their findings. "The basic renovation is nearly complete." I hesitated, knowing this represented a step forward in our carefully reconstructed relationship. "The children have been helping design it," he continued. "I'd value your perspective too." "All right," I agreed. "Perhaps tomorrow, while they're in school?" Something like hope flickered in his eyes. "I'll pick you up at 10? The next morning, I found myself unaccountably nervous as his car pulled into our driveway. This would be our first time alone together since his return. No children as buffers, no specific tasks to focus on. The Whitaker property had always been impressive from a distance, a 3-story Victorian perched dramatically on the coastal bluffs with sweeping views of the Atlantic. Up close, it was even more striking. The renovation had preserved its historic character while updating systems and spaces for modern living. "It's beautiful," I admitted as Edward led me through the front entrance. "It needed love," he replied. "Much like Lighthouse, when you first found it, I imagine." The interior was a thoughtful blend of old and new original woodwork restored to gleaming perfection, modern amenities integrated discreetly, spaces open to maximize the breathtaking ocean views. "The main living areas are here," Edward explained, leading me through a great room with soaring ceilings. "The children helped design this space especially." I recognized their influence immediately. Comfortable seating arranged for conversation rather than formal entertainment. Bookshelves filled with titles I knew they enjoyed. A chess table positioned by windows overlooking the water. Zoe suggested the library alcove. Edward continued, showing me a cozy nook lined with built-in shelves. Marco wanted the telescope platform on the widow's walk. The twins designed the garden we'll install next spring. As we moved through the house, I noticed something unexpected. For all its grandeur and obvious expense, the home felt welcoming rather than ostentatious. It was designed for living, for gathering, for comfort. "You've created something special here," I acknowledged. "It suits you. The real you." "That means a great deal coming from you," he said quietly. "There's one more space I'd like you to see." He led me to double doors at the end of a hallway, opening them to reveal a sunlit room with windows on 3 sides. The space was largely empty, save for a desk positioned to capture the coastal vista and several empty bookshelves. "This was meant to be my home office," Edward explained, "but I realized recently it would make an extraordinary studio for art therapy sessions. The light is perfect, and there's room for a small group." I turned to him, surprised. "Art therapy? You mentioned once that you wished Lighthouse had space and funding for more therapeutic programs," he reminded me. "Art therapy was high on your list for the children who've experienced trauma." My throat tightened with emotion. In the chaos of his departure and return, I'd forgotten that late-night conversation months ago, but he had remembered not just the general idea, but the specific program I'd wished we could provide. "Edward," I began, then faltered, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "The space is yours if you want it," he said simply, "for Lighthouse programs, or for your personal use, no strings attached." I studied him in the golden light filtering through the windows, this man who had washed up on our shore with nothing, who had proven himself with small daily kindnesses long before we knew of his wealth, who was now offering resources without expectation or demand. "Why are you doing this?" I asked softly. "Because I love you," he answered without hesitation. "Because I love those children. Because for the first time in my life, I found purpose beyond accumulation. I found connection." The simple honesty of his words pierced through my remaining defenses. Here, finally, was the absolute truth I'd needed not from Maxwell Bennett, billionaire, but from Edward, the man who had become essential to our makeshift family. "I've missed you," I admitted, the words escaping before I could reconsider them. His expression softened. "I've missed you too. Every day. I'm still afraid," I confessed, "of trusting again, of what happens when the novelty wears off, and this simple life isn't enough anymore." Edward closed the distance between us, taking my hands gently in his. "Olivia, look around you. I could have built a mansion, imported rare materials, created a showplace. Instead, I've built a home designed with the help of 4 extraordinary children and with spaces meant for the woman I love." His eyes held mine, sincere and unwavering. "The simple life you offer is the only one that's ever brought me genuine happiness." Maxwell Bennett's existence was the hollow one, all achievement, no connection. What I found at Lighthouse Haven is what matters. I searched his face, looking for any hint of insincerity or romanticized idealism. I found only honesty and patient hope. "One step at a time," I said finally, squeezing his hands. "But I'm willing to try again." The smile that illuminated his face was worth every moment of uncertainty. Without words, he pulled me gently into his arms, holding me as if I were precious, irreplaceable. I melted into his embrace, allowing myself to acknowledge how much I'd missed this, his strength, his warmth, the feeling of being truly seen. "We have a lot to figure out," I murmured against his chest. "We do," he agreed, "but we'll do it together. No more secrets. No more half-truths." When he kissed me, it felt like coming home. Fall deepened into winter. Edward's presence at Lighthouse Haven became so natural that the children stopped remarking on it. He divided his time between his new house, which they all called the Bluff House, and our home, often staying for dinner, helping with homework, participating in the evening routines that shaped our days. The renovation of Lighthouse Haven proceeded smoothly, with new spaces emerging that would allow us to serve more children, offer additional programs, and create the sanctuary I'd always envisioned. Edward's business acumen ensured that funds were managed wisely, creating a sustainable model that would support our work for years to come. More importantly, our relationship rebuilt itself on stronger foundations: honesty, transparency, mutual respect. We moved cautiously at first, both aware of the pain caused by past deceptions, but gradually the trust between us solidified into something deeper than before. One snowy December evening, as we sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, Edward took my hand, his expression uncharacteristically nervous. "I have something to ask you," he began. My heart quickened. "All right." He reached into his pocket, producing not a ring box as I'd half expected, but a familiar silver pendant, the compass with its ruby center that had washed ashore with him nearly a year ago. "This pendant," he said quietly, "once represented everything I thought mattered: success, achievement, the Bennett legacy. When I was lost, it was my only connection to who I had been." He turned it over in his fingers, the firelight catching on its polished surface. "But now I understand it was guiding me somewhere else entirely. To this place, to you, and the children." "Edward," I breathed, understanding the significance of this moment. "I'm not asking for marriage, not yet," he clarified. "That's a conversation for another day, when we're both completely ready. What I'm asking for is permission to make this official, to become a legal part of the children's lives, and yours." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I want to formally apply to become a resident counselor at Lighthouse Haven," he said with a smile that held both humor and deep sincerity. "To make this arrangement we've fallen into official, to be here every day, not just for dinner and special occasions." "You want to move in?" I clarified, unable to suppress my own smile. "I want to come home," he corrected gently. "The Bluff House can serve as auxiliary housing for Lighthouse, or as a retreat space, or whatever else is needed. But this," he gestured around us, at the worn furniture, the children's artwork on the walls, the imperfect, loving space we'd created. "This is where I belong, if you'll have me." I took the pendant from his hands, studying the compass design that had once been our only clue to his identity. "You know the children will be ecstatic." "And their mother?" he asked, echoing a question from months ago. This time, I didn't hesitate. "Their mother thinks it's about time." The joy that illuminated his face was worth every moment of pain and uncertainty we'd traversed to reach this point. As he pulled me into his arms, I felt the final pieces of our fractured story falling into place. "There's one condition," I added, leaning back to meet his gaze. "Anything," he promised. I held up the pendant. "This belongs in a different place now." The next morning, we gathered the children in the living room before school, Edward and I standing before them with barely contained excitement. "We have something to tell you," I began, watching their curious faces. Marco immediately jumped to conclusions. "You're getting married." "Not yet," Edward chuckled, "though that's a conversation for the future. Right now, we have a different announcement. Edward is officially joining our family," I explained. "He's going to live here at Lighthouse Haven full-time, as our resident counselor and my partner in running this place." For a moment, the children processed this information. Then chaos erupted, Danny and Jamie launching themselves at Edward in flying hugs, Marco pumping his fist in victory, Zoe trying to maintain her teenage cool while failing to suppress a delighted smile. "What about the Bluff House?" Marco asked suddenly. "You just finished it." "The Bluff House will become part of Lighthouse Haven," Edward explained. "A place for special programs, for older residents transitioning to independence, for families who need temporary housing while getting back on their feet." "So you're really staying? Forever?" Jamie asked, his small face serious. "Forever," Edward confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "I finally found my way home." Later that evening, after a celebration dinner complete with impromptu speeches from each child, Marco's notably including "It's About Time," Edward and I stood in the garden behind Lighthouse Haven. The winter air was crisp, stars brilliant overhead, the rhythmic flash of the lighthouse beams sweeping across the water. From the pocket of his jacket, Edward produced the silver pendant that had been his only possession when he washed ashore. Together, we approached the stone memorial garden we'd created years ago, a place commemorating important transitions in Lighthouse Haven's history. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "It's your only connection to your past." "My past is just that past," he replied, his voice steady with conviction. My future is here. Kneeling, he placed the pendant in a small hollow we'd prepared, covering it with a polished stone engraved with a simple inscription, "Every journey leads home." As we stood, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against him, I marveled at the improbable path that had brought us here. A storm, a man without memory, a pendant that eventually revealed everything. I adopted a billionaire, I murmured, humor threading through my voice. And somehow he adopted us right back. Edward's laugh rumbled against me, warm and real. Best investment I ever made. From inside, we heard the children calling for us something about hot chocolate and the board game they insisted we play every Friday night. Our family, waiting. "Shall we?" Edward asked, extending his hand. I took it without hesitation, and together we walked toward the light of home.